I have this camera here, Sprocket Rocket. Lomography just released 2 new colorways of the Sprocket Rocket. It comes in a blue and a red. Unavailable for a while, so they just re-released their Sprocket Rocket. What is a Sprocket Rocket? It's a panoramic 35mm camera. Yes, Sprocket as in the full frame of the image is exposed, even the sprockets, which isn't something you normally see often, or ever. Why do I have it and why am I talking about it? Lomography sent me this camera to test out, as well as a roll of Lady Grey 400 black and white film. Double exciting, as I've never used one of these cameras or shot with Lady Grey black and white film. First, we're gonna go over this camera. I'll give you a quick rundown of its functions and layout, and I will show some of my personal example photos. To be fully transparent, I didn't do a ton of research on this camera before shooting it. 2, I am recording this talking piece before I've received my scans back from my local lab, so I don't even know if these will come out. Could be a disaster, but at any rate, I can always just pull up some examples from Lomography's website. Let's hope that's not the case. Let's get into this camera. On top of the lens here, you have a letter N and a letter B. N is your normal shutter, which is 1/100. B is your bulb setting, which is long exposure. Also on top of the lens, this little lever, it's actually your shutter. Pretty unique, a little bit different than most cameras you've probably ever experienced, as it's not a button on the top of the camera. It is a little lever you push down on the side, right next to the N and B lever, which on this particular camera is a little finicky, so it wants to slide to the B. So you just gotta make sure that it is in the N normal mode. On top of your lens, so I have your focusing distance, which is 0.6 to 1 meter for close-up. Then you have 1 meter to infinity. A safe bet for me is I am just gonna stick to the 1 meter to infinity, because I don't know what the fuck 0.6 meter distance is from this lens. On the top of that camera, you have a knob on the left that says rewind, a knob on the right that says wind, shutter counter window, self-explanatory, and a second window right next to the shutter counter, which I will circle back to. To load your film, you simply pull back removes from these little spring clips, comes off in a whole piece. You pull this rewind knob up, load your film in here, drag it across, hook the leader as normal, wind until it grabs, throw that back down, throw your back of the camera on, you're good to go. On the bottom, you have a 1/4 inch thread for a tripod, which would come in very handy if you're shooting on your bulb or long exposure mode. On the bottom of the camera as well, or on the bottom of the lens, you have 2 little symbols or icons. One is a cloud and the other is a sun. The cloudy icon is an aperture of f10 and the sun aperture f16. You have your viewfinder right above the lens. Pretty straightforward. As I was shooting this roll, I couldn't hear a click of the film advancing to the next frame as I'm used to in all of my other cameras. So some of these photos may be overlapping each other or double exposure. Now, what I have learned after I've shot this roll, this second window that I mentioned is your frame indicator. Apparently, when you've advanced enough to the past that second frame, it will show white, knowing that you've fully moved over those 2 frames. Real quick, what do I mean by the 2 frames? Since this camera is panoramic, 1 frame is actually equal to 2 in order to fully advance to the next shot. If you have a roll of 36 exposures, you're only actually going to get about 18 shots from this camera, because each 2 frames equals 1 shot. Speaking of winding, and the reason why I couldn't hear a click or I was waiting for a click was you wind the frame yourself manually. My other cameras auto wind, or you advance the lever, you hear it click, and then you know that your camera has advanced fully to the next frame. This one is fully manual, so you can easily overwind, skip a few frames, or you can run into not winding enough and overlap frames. Again, I wish I would have done a little bit more research on this camera before shooting it, because that white dot on the top identifier would have been very handy for me to know when to stop winding. I'm human, and sometimes I assume I've dealt with so many different cameras that I can figure it out, or I will figure it out as I go. That's where we're at. Hopefully I get some cool photos. I think regardless, I'll throw up some photos from Lomography since they have some really cool examples. I shot this roll down at the Tropicana Hotel, which is closing as of, by the time I'm filming this, tomorrow, April 2nd. I'll have a video on that separate. I might purchase one of these down the road. I'm mental and funky with it now that I understand it more. Shout out to Lomography for sending me this camera to test out. This isn't one of the new colorways. This is an older one, which color doesn't affect performance. And thanks for letting me take a crack at this camera. Pretty unique, pretty quirky. Definitely will add a little bit of flair into your repertoire of cameras if you are looking for something different as well as wide. It is a panoramic. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next one.